June 1944, the beaches of Normandy. The largest amphibious invasion in human history is about to begin. Thousands of Allied soldiers are preparing to storm Hitler's fortress Europe. But hundreds of miles away in a different part of England, a different kind of soldier is preparing for battle. These soldiers carry no rifles. They fire no guns. Their weapons are paintbrushes, sound equipment, and rubber. Their mission is not to kill the enemy, but to deceive him, to make him see armies that do not exist, to hear tanks that are not there, to fear shadows and chase ghosts. They are the Ghost Army, and they will save thousands of lives without firing a single shot. This is the story of the most unusual unit in World War II, the story of artists and illusion makers who turned the battlefield into a stage, who used creativity as a weapon, who proved that in war sometimes the greatest power is not in what you show the enemy, but in what you make them believe. War has always been about deception. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, written over 2,000 years ago, that all warfare is based on deception. Napoleon used diversionary attacks to confuse his enemies. Hannibal hid his true strength until the perfect moment. But World War II would take military deception to an entirely new level. By 1942, the Allied command was facing a fundamental problem. They needed to invade occupied Europe, but German defenses were formidable. Concrete bunkers lined the coast. Artillery covered every beach. Panzer divisions waited inland, ready to counterattack any landing force. A direct assault would cost tens of thousands of lives, unless the Germans could be deceived, unless they could be made to look in the wrong direction, to defend the wrong beaches, to send their reserves to the wrong locations. British intelligence had already pioneered sophisticated deception operations. They turned captured German spies into double agents. They fed false information to the Nazi high command. They created entire fictional armies on paper, complete with fake radio traffic and fabricated orders. But the Americans wanted something more, something tangible, something that could be seen from the air, photographed by reconnaissance planes, and reported by spies. They wanted to create phantom armies that looked absolutely real. In January 1944, the U.S. Army activated a classified unit at Camp Forest, Tennessee. Its official designation was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but everyone who knew about it called it by another name. The Ghost Army. The recruitment for this unit was unlike anything the military had ever done. The Army did not want infantry soldiers or tank crews. They wanted artists, sound engineers, set designers, creative minds who could build illusions and sell them convincingly. The recruitment officers visited art schools across America. They went to theater programs, radio stations, advertising agencies. They looked for men with imagination, men who could think outside the box, men who could see the world not as it was, but as it could appear to be. One of those men was Bill Blass. Yes, that Bill Blass, the fashion designer who would become famous. After the war for dressing Hollywood stars and first ladies. In 1943, he was a young artist from Indiana who enlisted in the Army and found himself recruited for a very special assignment. Another was Ellsworth Kelly, a 20-year-old from New Jersey with extraordinary artistic talent. After the war, he would become one of the most celebrated abstract painters of the 20th century. His works would hang in major museums around the world. But in 1943, he was a private in the U.S. Army, learning how to make inflatable tanks look real from 5,000 feet. There was Arthur Shilstone, a commercial artist who would spend the war painting fake insignias and creating dummy vehicles. After the war, he would illustrate for National Geographic and other major publications. And there was Harold Lehner, a sound engineer from New York who had worked in radio. He would become part of a sonic deception unit that could make a small group of men sound like an entire armored division. These men and over 1,000 others like them were brought together at Camp Forest. They were told almost nothing about their mission, just that it was classified, important, dangerous, and very, very unusual. The training began. The soldiers learned camouflage techniques, how to disguise real equipment and how to make fake equipment look real. They studied German reconnaissance methods. What did enemy pilots look for from the air? What would convince them they were seeing an actual military formation? They practiced assembling inflatable tanks. These were not crude balloons. They were sophisticated rubber sculptures, carefully designed to mimic M4 Sherman tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and jeeps. When properly inflated and positioned, they looked genuine from the air. German reconnaissance. Photos would show Allied armor massing in specific locations. The Sonic Deception Unit developed something even more remarkable. They recorded the sounds of real military operations, tank engines rumbling, tracks clanking, trucks moving in convoy, soldiers shouting orders. They recorded hours and hours of audio, then engineered playback systems that could project these sounds for miles. Imagine being a German soldier on the front line. You are in your foxhole at night. In the distance, you hear the unmistakable sound of Sherman tanks moving into position, dozens of them. You hear the diesel engines, the squeaking of tracks, the voices of American soldiers. You report this to your commanders. Intelligence confirms it. Reconnaissance photos show tank formations in that sector. The Germans shift their forces to meet this threat. But there are no tanks, just recordings played through loudspeakers hidden in the woods, just rubber decoys positioned in clearings. The real American armor is miles away, moving to a completely different objective. The Ghost Army also created fake radio traffic. Radio operators transmitted endless streams of coded messages, mimicking the communications of a genuine armored division. They used correct military protocols, proper call signs, realistic message content. German signals intelligence would intercept these transmissions and plot the location of American units on their maps. But those units did not exist. They were phantoms, ghosts on the airwaves. By May 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was ready. They shipped out to England, joining the massive buildup of forces preparing for D-Day. They were given their first major mission, Operation Fortitude. Operation Fortitude was the cover plan for D-Day. The Allies knew the Germans expected an invasion. But where? The most logical place was the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. It was the shortest route from England to France. The most obvious choice. So the Allies decided to make the Germans believe that was exactly where they would attack. While the real invasion force prepared to land in Normandy, a massive deception operation would create the illusion of an even larger force preparing to assault. Calais? A fictional army was created on paper. The first U.S. Army group, commanded by General George Patton. FUSAG, as it was called, existed only in German intelligence reports, but it looked very real. Fake radio traffic filled the airwaves. Double agents reported seeing Patton inspecting troops, and the Ghost Army went to work making FUSAG visible. In southeast England, opposite Calais, the Ghost Army deployed. They inflated hundreds of rubber tanks, positioned dummy landing craft in harbors, set up fake supply depots, painted unit insignias on vehicles, created the appearance of a massive military presence. German reconnaissance planes photographed it all. The Luftwaffe had limited air capability by 1944, but they still conducted surveillance missions. When their photos were developed, they showed exactly what the Allies wanted them to see. Tank formations, artillery batteries, supply dumps. An invasion force aimed directly at Calais. German High Command studied these photos. They analyzed the radio intercepts. They read reports from their agents in England. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The main invasion would come at Calais. Normandy might see a diversionary attack, but the real blow would fall at Calais. Adolf Hitler himself believed it. He kept powerful panzer divisions near Calais, waiting to smash the Allied invasion when it came. Even after D-Day began on June 6, 1944, the Germans remained convinced that Normandy was a feint. The real attack was still coming at Calais. They kept their best units waiting for an invasion that would never come. The Ghost Army's deception had worked. By the time the Germans realized Normandy was the main invasion, it was too late. The Allies had established their beachhead. Reinforcements were pouring ashore. The liberation of Europe had begun. And the Ghost Army had helped make it possible. Not with bullets, but with balloons. Not with bombs, but with illusion. After D-Day, the Ghost Army crossed the English Channel and joined the campaign in France. Now their missions became even more dangerous. They were no longer operating safely behind friendly lines in England. They were on the front lines, often positioned dangerously close to German forces. Their objective remained the same: create illusions. Make the Germans believe Allied forces were in locations where they were not. Draw enemy attention away from real operations. One of their most successful missions came in September 1944, during the Allied advance across France. The real 2nd Armored Division was preparing to attack the city of Brest, a heavily fortified German stronghold on the coast of Brittany. But the approach was difficult, and the Germans were well prepared. The Ghost Army deployed south of Brest, creating the illusion that a major force was preparing to attack from that direction. They inflated their rubber tanks, set up dummy artillery, played their sonic deceptions, generated intense radio traffic. German commanders detected this buildup. They shifted troops and artillery to meet the threat from the south. They reinforced that sector, weakening other parts of their defense. Then the real 2nd Armored Division attacked from the north. The Germans, caught off guard, were unable to reposition their forces in time. Brest fell. Thousands of German soldiers surrendered. The Ghost Army had drawn the defenders out of position, and real soldiers had exploited the gap. The deception had worked, but it had also been dangerous. The Ghost Army soldiers were within range of German artillery. If the Germans had discovered the deception and realized the rubber tanks were fakes, They could have shelled the Ghost Army's positions. The artists and sound engineers would have had no defense. But the illusion held. The Germans never realized they were chasing phantoms. Through the fall and winter of 1944, the Ghost Army conducted over 20 major deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Each mission required careful planning, precise execution, and nerves of steel. The soldiers would arrive at a staging area, usually at night. They would begin assembling their equipment. The inflatable tanks came folded in canvas bags. It took 4 men about 15 minutes to inflate a single tank using portable air pumps. They would position each tank carefully, making sure the spacing and orientation looked realistic from the air. Dummy artillery pieces were placed in battery formations. Fake supply dumps were created using crates and tarps. Vehicles were marked with the insignias of real units that were actually operating elsewhere. Meanwhile, the sonic deception crews would set up their speakers in the woods. These were massive sound systems, each weighing over 500 pounds. They would position them to project sound toward German lines. Then, usually after dark, they would begin playing their recordings. The sound of an armored division moving into position, the rumble of tanks, the clatter of equipment. The radio operators would set up their transmitters and begin broadcasting. They would mimic the traffic patterns of a real division headquarters, send messages about supply requisitions, personnel movements, tactical orders, all fake. All designed to create the signature of a genuine military unit, and the visual deception specialists would add the finishing touches. They would create tracks in the mud, as if heavy vehicles had passed through. They would light campfires in realistic patterns. They would hang laundry on lines, as soldiers would do in an actual bivouac. Every detail mattered. Every element had to sell the illusion. Then they would wait, sometimes for days, maintaining the deception while real Allied operations unfolded elsewhere, hoping the Germans would take the bait, hoping they would not be discovered. The psychological pressure was intense. These men were not trained infantry. They were artists. Yet they were operating close to enemy lines, often within artillery range, sometimes within sight of German positions. They carried weapons, but their primary defense was the illusion they created. If the Germans realized they were facing rubber tanks operated by a handful of men with sound equipment, the consequences could be deadly. But the illusion always held. The Germans never caught on. They continued to treat Ghost Army deployments as genuine threats, shifting forces to counter them, weakening their lines elsewhere. One soldier later recalled the surreal nature of their work. By day, they would inflate tanks and paint scenery. By night, they would listen to German artillery falling nearby, hoping the enemy did not realize the target was not worth shelling. It was like performing theater in the middle of a battlefield, except the audience was trying to kill them. Bill Blass spent much of the war painting, not artistic masterpieces but military insignias. He would take a plain truck and transform it into a vehicle from a specific unit, the blue and white keystone of the 28th Infantry Division, the red ball of the 2nd Armored Division. Each insignia had to be perfect. German intelligence knew what these symbols looked like. A sloppy paint job could give away the deception. Ellsworth Kelly sketched constantly. He drew the French countryside, the villages they passed through, the civilians they encountered. His artistic eye captured details that photographs missed. After the war, these sketches would form part of his artistic evolution. But during the war, they were simply a way to stay sane, to remember that beauty existed even in the midst of destruction. Harold Lehner and the Sonic Deception crew became masters of audio illusion. They learned how sound traveled across different terrain, how weather affected it, how to position speakers to create realistic three-dimensional audio effects. They could make a few trucks sound like an entire convoy. They could simulate the specific acoustic signature of different types of tanks. It was audio engineering at the cutting edge of what was possible in 1944. The Ghost Army's operations continued through the Battle of the Bulge in winter 1944, when the Germans launched their desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes. The Ghost Army was called upon to help stabilize the situation. They created the illusion of reinforcements arriving, making the Germans believe Allied strength was greater than it actually was. In one operation during the battle, the Ghost Army simulated 2 entire divisions moving into position. They inflated tanks across a wide front, generated massive amounts of radio traffic, played recordings of armored columns on the move. German intelligence reported the arrival of major reinforcements. The German commanders, already overstretched, became more cautious. They slowed their advance. That caution gave real Allied forces time to regroup and counterattack. How many lives did the Ghost Army save? It is impossible to calculate precisely, but military historians have estimated that their deception operations drew German forces away from real objectives in over 20 major operations. Each time, Allied soldiers faced weaker opposition than they would have otherwise. Each time, fewer men died taking an objective because the Germans had been deceived into defending the wrong place. Thousands of soldiers who came home after the war owed their lives to men they never met, to artists who painted fake insignias, to sound engineers who played recordings in the woods, to soldiers who inflated rubber tanks in the darkness and prayed the Germans would not discover the truth. As the war ground toward its conclusion in early 1945, the Ghost Army continued operating. They followed the Allied advance into Germany itself. They set up their deceptions near the Rhine River. They helped cover river crossings. They simulated build-ups before attacks. They became masters of their craft, refining their techniques with each operation. The German military, even in collapse, never fully understood what had been done to them. After the war, when captured German officers were shown photographs of the inflatable tanks and told about the sonic deceptions, many refused to believe it. They insisted they had faced real units, that their intelligence had been accurate. The illusion had been so complete, so convincing, that even in defeat, they could not accept they had been fooled by rubber and recordings. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The Ghost Army's mission was complete. They had conducted their final deception operation in late April, near the Rhine. Now they packed up their equipment, deflated their tanks for the last time, packed away their sound systems, prepared to go home, but there was a problem. Their work was classified, top secret. The military did not want potential future enemies to know about these deception techniques. So the Ghost Army soldiers were ordered to say nothing about what they had done. Nothing about the inflatable tanks. Nothing about the sonic deceptions. Nothing about any of it. They came home as anonymous soldiers. Just another group of men returning from the war. Their families asked what they had done in Europe. They gave vague answers, signed legal documents promising never to reveal their missions, and they kept that promise. For decades, Bill Blass became one of the most successful fashion designers in America. He dressed Hollywood stars, created iconic American fashion, built a design empire, but he never spoke about the Ghost Army, not publicly. Not until decades later, when the classification was finally lifted. Ellsworth Kelly became an internationally renowned abstract artist. His paintings sold for millions of dollars. Museums held retrospectives of his work, but he rarely mentioned the war. When he did, he spoke about the French countryside, about learning to see shapes and colors in new ways, about how those years influenced his artistic vision. Arthur Shillstone had a successful career as a commercial illustrator. His work appeared in major publications, but he never told his clients that during the war he had painted fake military insignias to deceive the Nazi war machine. Harold Lehner returned to sound engineering, worked in radio and television, but the most sophisticated audio deception work he ever did remained classified for 50 years. The Ghost Army faded into obscurity, a footnote in military records, a classified unit that few people knew existed. Their story was almost lost to history. But in the 1990s, things began to change. The military finally declassified the Ghost Army's records. Historians gained access to operation reports, photographs, and documentation. Surviving veterans, now in their 70s and 80s, were finally free to speak about what they had done. And an extraordinary story emerged, a story of creativity and courage, of artists who became warriors without firing a shot, of men who used imagination as a weapon and saved countless lives in the process. Rick Bayer, a documentary filmmaker, became fascinated with the Ghost Army story. He spent years interviewing surviving veterans, gathering archival materials, and piecing together the complete picture of what this unit had accomplished. In 2013, he released a documentary film that brought the Ghost Army story to a wider audience. The surviving veterans, many now in their 90s, finally received recognition for their service. They gave interviews, attended reunions, shared their stories with younger generations. They were honored by Congress. Museums created exhibits about their work, but many expressed the same sentiment. They had simply done their job. They had been given an unusual mission and had carried it out to the best of their abilities. They did not consider themselves heroes, just soldiers, artists in uniform. Yet what they accomplished was remarkable. They proved that warfare is not just about firepower and numbers. It is about information, perception, psychology. They showed that an enemy who believes he sees something will act on that belief, even if what he sees is an illusion. The Ghost Army operated on the principle that the enemy's mind is a battlefield as important as any physical terrain. By controlling what the enemy believed, they controlled where he sent his forces, where he concentrated his defenses, where he expected attacks that never came. In over 20 major operations, conducting more than 1,000 individual deceptions, The Ghost Army never had a single operation exposed before it was completed. Never had their illusions discovered while they mattered. The Germans were fooled every single time. Modern military forces still use deception. The techniques have evolved. Digital technology has replaced rubber tanks. Electronic warfare has superseded sonic deceptions. But the fundamental principle remains the same. Make the enemy see what you want him to see. Hear what you want him to hear. Believe what you want him to believe. And then strike where he is not looking. The Ghost Army's legacy extends beyond military tactics. It is a story about the power of creativity, about thinking differently, about finding unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible problems. These men were not trained warriors. They were artists, designers, engineers, creative minds who saw the world differently. The Army took a chance on them, gave them resources and authority, trusted them to figure out how to turn creativity into a weapon. And they succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. They proved that artistic thinking has a place even in the brutal calculus of warfare, that imagination can save lives, that sometimes the paintbrush is mightier than the sword. The story of the Ghost Army is also a reminder that heroes come in many forms. Not every hero charges a machine gun nest or flies a fighter plane. Some heroes paint fake insignias in the rain. Some inflate rubber tanks in the darkness. Some play recordings in the woods while enemy artillery falls nearby. These men faced danger, but not in the way infantry soldiers did. Their danger came from the possibility of discovery, from the knowledge that if the Germans realized they were facing a phantom army, real shells would rain down on their positions. They had no armor, no heavy weapons, just their wits and their craft. And they won 20 times, 1,000 deceptions, countless lives saved. Today, visitors to the Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. can see artifacts from the Ghost Army, one of the actual inflatable tanks carefully preserved, photographs of the deception operations, artwork created by the soldier artists, sound equipment used for the sonic deceptions. These objects are more than historical curiosities. They are testaments to human ingenuity, evidence that even in humanity's darkest hours, creativity finds a way, that art and war, two seemingly opposite forces, can work together, that imagination, properly applied, can change outcomes. The men of the Ghost Army understood something profound. Reality is not fixed. It is perceived, and perception can be manipulated. By controlling the enemy's perception of reality, they controlled his actions. They turned the battlefield into a stage, the war into theater, and themselves into the directors of a deadly drama. They wrote a script where German forces would look left while Americans attacked right, where phantom armies would draw fire while real soldiers advanced unopposed, where rubber tanks would save steel soldiers. And because they wrote that script so convincingly, thousands of young men came home to their families, lived long lives, raised children, pursued dreams, never knowing they owed their survival to artists they had never met. This is the power of the Ghost Army, not just what they did, but what they represented. A different kind of courage, a different kind of strength, the understanding that intelligence can triumph over force, that deception used ethically in a just cause can be an instrument of preservation rather than destruction. The Ghost Army never killed anyone. That was not their mission. Their mission was to save lives, to win battles without bloodshed, to make the enemy fight shadows while real soldiers accomplished real objectives. They succeeded at that mission with a perfection rate that combat units rarely achieve. In the long history of warfare, filled with tales of courage and sacrifice, the story of the Ghost Army stands apart. It reminds us that war is ultimately a human endeavor, fought between human minds, and that the human mind, with its capacity for creativity and imagination, remains the most powerful weapon of all. These men went to war armed with paintbrushes and air pumps. They returned home having helped win that war through deception and artistry. They spent decades in silence, their achievements unknown. But now we know. Now we remember. We remember Bill Blass painting insignias in the French countryside, Ellsworth Kelly sketching between operations, Harold Lehner positioning speakers in the darkness, Arthur Shilstone creating dummy vehicles, and 1,000 others whose names are less famous but whose contributions were equally vital. We remember that they volunteered for a mission they did not fully understand, that they served with courage and creativity, that they saved thousands of lives without taking a single one, that they proved war can be won with illusion as well as firepower. And we remember the profound truth their story teaches us, that reality is what we perceive it to be, that the greatest victories sometimes come not from destroying the enemy, but from deceiving him, that imagination properly channeled can change the world. The Ghost Army, artists in uniform, masters of illusion, silent heroes whose greatest weapon was the enemy's own mind. They fought with rubber and recordings, with paint and sound, with creativity and courage. They won battles that were never fought, saved lives that were never lost, and proved that sometimes the most powerful force on any battlefield is not what exists, but what the enemy believes exists. In the end, that is their legacy. Not the inflatable tanks or the sonic deceptions, not the technical details of their operations, but the fundamental lesson they embodied. That truth is powerful, but illusion in the right hands and the right cause can be even more powerful. That 6 men on skis can destroy a factory, and 1,000 artists can deceive an army. That the impossible is merely the improbable waiting for the right people to attempt it. The Ghost Army proved that wars are not won only by those who fight hardest, but sometimes by those who think most creatively. And in doing so, they saved thousands of lives, changed the course of history, and reminded us all that heroism takes many forms. Sometimes it charges into battle, and sometimes it quietly inflates a rubber tank in the darkness and waits for dawn to reveal the illusion that will save lives by the hundreds. This is their story. This is why we remember, because they showed us that courage is not just facing danger, but outsmarting it. That strength is not just in the arm that wields the sword, but in the mind that knows when to sheathe it and reach for the paintbrush instead. The Ghost Army, an army that never was, but whose impact was very real. An illusion that saved lives, a deception that served truth, a phantom that haunts history not with horror but with hope.